Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development and Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. Hey guys, I am Wes Dove, and I'm going to do something a little bit off the cuff today. I've got some notes that I'm going to refer to as we go through it, and hopefully it serves you well. So to give you a little bit of background, Cindy and I recently had the opportunity to be part of one of our larger clients' professional development days. And we did 3 different sessions for them. One of those was something that we had not done for many groups before. In fact, we had never done it together. I did it by myself, which if you've seen me and Cindy deliver, most of the time we're doing it together. The other 2 sessions we've done for probably a couple thousand people collectively, keynote sessions, large group trainings, and so on. And it was solid. They were 2 of our favorite lessons to do. Interestingly enough, the one that had the most participation and was almost filled up, I think it might have even had a waiting list, was the session that I'd written probably in 2021 or 2022 for our Leading at the Next Level program. And I'd only done it 1 or 2 other times for groups in person, and one was specifically for our friends with the Virginia Employment Commission, Jobs for Veterans State Grants, no longer called the Virginia Employment Commission, the arm that they're under, but that's who we did it for most recently, or I did it for. And it was a lesson that we rebranded. It was called Setting Priorities, Systems for Great Results. And that was not the original lesson. If you go in our Leading at the Next Level program, you've got access to, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we close. It has a different name. It's really about systems and productivity and efficiencies and so on. I think it's something about getting great results. Not exactly sure, but you get the point. So here's the reality. When I wrote it, I remember distinctly one morning, I'm doing the whole catch up on the social media notifications, looking through the feed and so on. And I see a buddy of mine, and he posts how the evening before he had gotten home. He owns a practice. He's extremely successful. He and his wife have a really large family. And I jokingly in the lesson say they have something like 24 kids. That's not true. They don't have 24. I think they've got 5 or 6, a couple of which are adopted. Just a fantastic family. He gets home, and his social media feed says he got home with all those kids in the house to a spotless kitchen. And it was right after dinner time. He had to work late, so he missed dinner, but the kitchen was spotless. Everything was put away. And when I saw that, I thought, dear God, how did that happen? Because, man, I remember having roommates years ago before Cindy and I met. I remember having kids, and sometimes you don't have a spotless kitchen if you're eating paper plates and you've got takeout pizza, right? It's hard to do that. And as he really expanded on that idea, I think it was a LinkedIn post all those years ago, as he expanded on that idea, it really boiled down to his wife had developed systems where each of the kids had specific responsibilities, and they were extremely accountable to fulfill those responsibilities. Now, as I saw that, I really thought about how over the course of my professional career, and if I'm being honest, my entire life, I've thought about all the different tools and all the different systems that I've had to put in place to help me get results in any one thing. If you know me well, you know, gosh, I'm not an extremely smart person. I'm willing to work really, really hard, but I need to have tools. I need to have systems in my life to make sure I get the things done that I'm required to do. So that really spurred me to write the lesson. Now, I thought back over the 20 or so years in my professional career at that point in time, and I thought, gosh, I remember reading for the very first time, maybe in 01, 02, 03, somewhere in there, a book called Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the things that stood out to me about that book was his idea of keep the main thing the main thing. I also remembered back in maybe 2001, when I first read John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, how the law of priorities talked about the 3 R's, and I'll talk about those in more detail shortly, and how those things were just so critical. Now, as I was doing the research to write the full lesson, I'm not going to share it all here. I want to give you some wave tops, and I would encourage you, if you've never accessed our full Leading at the Next Level program, take advantage of it. I've got some cool stuff in the show notes that I'll circle back to at the end, but I think it's a huge value that it could give you, even if it's just for this one lesson in more depth. Now, I found an article called 9 Habits of Productive People that asked the question, why are we all so obsessed with productivity? Well, if it's me and you, if we're in the private sector, and quite frankly, even if you're in the nonprofit or in the public sector, there's a deep desire for productivity to really make sure that we get all the tasks done we're responsible for, that we can have a profitable business, we can maintain our organizations, we can be good stewards of the resources we've got. We've got those responsibilities. And the more leadership we end up having, the more that responsibility falls on our shoulders to make sure that we're being productive, and our teams are as well. So that really spurred me, and it challenged me to think back to my manufacturing career, and all the years that I was in manufacturing. They were called different things over the years. I was heavily involved into lean implementations, 5S, Six Sigma, all the different things that fall under that lean umbrella. And I remember being intimately involved with this thing called standardized worksheets and job breakdown sheets that really walked through, if you've got to do a job, how can you specify in detail every specific exact thing that goes on and how you perform that task. Not just so you do it, but so that job can be done consistently, repeatedly, over and over and over. It's a training tool. It's a way of measuring productivity. It's a way that we can get cycle counts. It's a way we can build cost structures, and we can be efficient. We can build in quality in everything we do. It just becomes such a critical part of the process. And every organization deals with something like that. And those things became the systems in organizations like that. As we were with a large healthcare organization that shared this lesson, they were going, absolutely, people die if we don't have systems. If we can't maintain quality, consistency, people could die. So we've got to have those things in place. Now, in John Maxwell's 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth, in chapter 7, it's called the Law of Design. He shares the definition of a system, but he also shares this from a guy named Michael Gerber, where he says, systems permit ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results predictably. Now, guys, I'm going to tell you, in my life, systems have been the one thing that have allowed me to get what I would say are remarkable results, extraordinary results even, right? And I can do it predictively over and over and over. As I shared the lesson yesterday, just a few days ago, I'm thinking through it and going, my goodness, in the last couple of years, I barely graduated high school because I absolutely refused to read books and I refused to write essays and things like that. But in the last 2 or 3 years, as I share this, I've written almost 4 complete book manuscripts, 2 of which have been released and made #1 Amazon bestsellers. The third is coming out in just a few months, and the fourth is almost done, that we'll be working with some publishers on. And that's because I've got systems, because, hey, the reality is those things weren't anything to do with our revenue producing work. We're over and above whatever else we were doing. But gosh, I've met people that it's taken years and years and years and they've said, I'd like to write a book one day, and they never did. And I'm not saying any of that to brag. I'm saying systems were the key behind all of that. Now, let's think about what I shared with John Maxwell in those 3 R's. And I'm not talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic, because that's what I thought it was originally. I'm thinking, all right, this is going to be easy. I know reading and writing and arithmetic. I learned that in 2nd or 3rd grade, but that's not what he talked about. One of the articles that I read as I was studying for the full lesson, I found something called 18 Habits of Highly Productive People and what they all have in common. And it had a quote in there that said something along the lines of, we've all known that person who can seem to get an hour's worth of work done in 20 minutes. Now, as I shared the full lesson, I gave a quote there, or a saying that I've heard over and over and over. I've grown up, I've lived most of my life in the country, not where I've got water and sewer lines like in a city or in a municipality. We have septic fields, right? And I've heard this thing that when the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, sometimes it's over top of a septic system. And you know what makes that grass greener? It's usually the poop in the septic system, right? But the reality is, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes that guy actually is getting an hour's worth of work done in 20 minutes. It's not just perception. It's just not the septic field making that grass look greener. It's because he's got intricate, really, really effective systems that he's put gobs of time and energy into to make sure that those systems help him get great results that most people from the outside looking in think, wow, he's getting an hour's worth of work done every 20 minutes. And maybe he is, but it's because he's invested heavily into building those great systems. Now, as we went through that, and I'm flipping through some pages to make sure I hit the high spots of the notes, as we went through that, and we talked about different productivity tools, I shared a bunch of different ideas that I'd researched in putting together the lessons. But the reality really boils down to for me and for every busy professional, everybody in the leadership role carrying a lot of responsibility, I don't need a lot of things. I need some simple things that I can do, because indefinitely the stuff's going to hit the proverbial fan. And when it does, if the things we have in place aren't simple, it's going to be really, really hard to sustain. One of the many articles that I referenced in the full lesson, it talked about a calendar. And I'll tell you, for me, a calendar has been the most important thing that I've been able to use for the last 25 years. I remember just as soon as Cindy and I got married, I bought a Palm Pilot. Wasn't because I was a nerd, because I didn't know technology much, but I realized I could carry it around in my pocket. I could build in reminders and notifications and all these things to systematize things. It went from there to a BlackBerry. I remember having a BlackBerry when they were out, and thank God those things are gone, because that little flashing light when you had a notification was just tough to keep up with. They called it a crackberry for a reason, right? And now my iPhone, and I'm able to keep my Google Calendar tied to my iPhone and build those reminders into all the different things I put on my calendar, so I can make sure that I have planned out and I could get the necessary things done. I make out time on my calendar every day. But even in doing that, regardless of how you use whatever system it is for you, you need to make sure it fits. Now, before I go into how we can each do that, and I talk about some understanding ourselves and at a level that we can do, I want to stress to you, I heard somebody once say, gosh, if I get too systematic, if I build in too many things, it's going to remove my authenticity. I won't be able to be genuine in what I do. And what I'm going to challenge you with is, if you're willing to be authentic and you're intentional about being genuine, you're going to be authentic and genuine. If you're not an authentic and genuine person, it doesn't matter if you do or don't have systems. It's just not going to be there, right? And I would argue that if you build good systems in place, and you do the proper planning and you do the prep work necessary, then those systems will give you the variance, will give you the bandwidth, if you will, so you can be more systematic, but you can be more genuine with the folks that you interact with. You don't have to think about the little details. The little details are taken care of. You can make sure whatever you're doing is personal to the individual you're interacting with, and that's where it becomes powerful. Now, in doing that, if we're going to sustain it, I mentioned the systems are going to help us sustain whatever we do. But the reality is, if I build a system for me, it's very unlikely that Cindy will be able to use that same system, because we're wired very, very different. Now, there's a fellow that I'm going to say probably 200 years ago, there was a guy named Confucius, and he said something along the lines of, part of life success is really knowing ourselves. That helps us be effective in whatever we do. Now, over the last 25 years, I've learned that what energizes Cindy, what she gets fulfillment from, and what energizes me, what I get fulfillment from, are likely two different things in any given moment. She enjoys a lot of detail. She likes relaxing things. She likes thinking through the processes and procedures. I like getting shit done. I don't like sitting still much. As I take the time to share this, it's tough for me. If you would see me on the video live, you'd see that I'm moving around a lot as I do it. And that's just how I'm wired. I like moving fast. I like getting results. And we've really come to understand that in depth by completing a scientifically validated DISC assessment. I could have a whole conversation with you about all the different types of DISC that's on the market. It's not about that, but the reality is all things are not created equal. All DISC is not created equal. And if you've never completed a scientifically validated DISC assessment, or if you've completed some of the crap ones that are on the market, you may not understand everything I'm talking about here. But the reality is, when I learned to understand not just the assessment itself, but the science behind it, the full DISC model of human behavior, and I learned both my strengths and my blind spots and how to prepare for both, I was able to develop systems that not only complemented my blind spots and my weaknesses, but really helped me sustain in my areas of strength. And in that full lesson, I go into what we need to do and how we can consider that as we're building systems to help ourselves sustain it. But we also need, in many cases in leadership roles, we need to help our teams build systems so they can get their work done. And if we're building a system for a team member and it's not one they can sustain, we're wasting our time and theirs. But if we can recognize how they're wired, where they get fulfillment, and what they need from a process, then we've got a likely shot that we can build that system in place so they can get sustainable systematic, predictable results over time that will dwarf the competition, that will give so much better effectiveness and productivity that they may never achieve any other way. That septic system is no longer what makes the grass green. It's the stinking system that we've put in place that really helps us produce results. And again, it's very, very different for each of us. Cindy's systems, and she lives by systems as well, are wildly different than my systems. And it's not a bad or good. It's about what works and what can we manage, what helps us get the things done that we need to do on an ongoing basis so we can serve the people that we're responsible to. Now, if you've gotten any value out of this, if you understand at a high level how important those systems are as we develop our priorities, and I didn't even touch on those 3 R's, the not the reading and writing and arithmetic, the required, the return, and the reward. And in the full lesson, I go into that in a lot of detail and how even once we've went through those systems help us really execute those things in the manner that we need to. If you've gotten value out of this, what I've built in here, we used to do something a little bit different, but I wanted to be able to serve you long term. We've built out an option that you can get a 14-day all-access trial to our Leading at the Next Level program for just $1. It's a setup fee. It's not a big deal, but it's for $1. And if you maintain it after that, you're going to get an 80% discount. 80% discount on the monthly membership. It's regularly $50 a month, and you'll get it for 80% off. I think it ends up being $9.97 ongoing for as long as you keep your membership. Now, in that program, we have, I'm going to say, I think in the show notes, I put 150 lessons. In reality, it's about 170 lessons, and it grows every single month because we add new lessons all the time. On the digital side, when we do the live lessons, we share them to everybody that has access through their membership, and we do a live Q&A that we wrap up that's never recorded, that doesn't go into the digital side, so we can really have interaction with the folks that have access and talk with them through what did you hear, what did you take away, what do you want to apply, what result do you want to get that moves the needle in your organization's bottom line, how do you build your leadership culture, how can you take action, what do your behaviors look like. And it's very, very intentional that we do that because I'm always excited if somebody takes notes. When the session wrapped up, as I shared this with the big group yesterday, they gave me applause, and that's always weird for me. But the reality is I followed up and I closed with saying, guys, I appreciate that. I'll appreciate more if you take action. I'll appreciate more if you put it into practice and you lead your teams more effectively based on what you learn. And I may never know what that is. I'd love for you to share. Gosh, if you're listening here, I'd love to hear how you've taken action and how you've applied something that I've shared in this process. The reality is you may not, but I hope you do take that action. You may never share it with me, but I hope you take that action. The other thing that you'll see in the show notes is a link to the page of our website that talks a little bit more in detail about the DISC model of human behavior. And in fact, it lists a couple different variations of the scientifically validated DISC assessment that we use 100% of the time. We're licensed in several different ones. This particular brand, this style, gives us some amazing tools. It's very, very inexpensive at the low end. I think it's $12.95. Gosh, I don't even think you could get a value meal at a fast food joint for that. But the reality is it gives you some amazing tools. Now, here's the last thing I'll say is if you aren't familiar with any of what I've shared and you want to reach out and just have a quick conversation about how you can utilize it, how you can get the real value from what I've shared, admin@dove-development.net will ping us and we'll be very, very responsive. That's part of who we are and what we do. We want to be able to serve you. Hope this gives you something you can use right away. Make it a great day. We look forward to seeing you soon. God bless.